The end of the Indian Wars, Little Bighorn to Wounded Knee. Not surprisingly, white settlers did not adhere to their side of the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie and continued to settle in the region of northern Wyoming and Montana, and the United States military did very little to stop them. The Sioux leaders, Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, began to put a plan in place to prevent further settlement. In June 1876, the Sioux leaders planned an attack on General George Armstrong Custer and his 7th Cavalry. Custer and the United States Army greatly underestimated the number of Amerindian warriors that were in the area, and that the majority of them were sleeping when he moved his troops into position along the Little Bighorn River in Montana. What happened when the battle began is specifically unknown, because no one in the 5 companies under Custer's command survived the battle. The Battle of Little Bighorn became known for Custer's last stand, an enormous victory for the Sioux, but also led the United States Army forces not to trust Amerindians in the future, and essentially to shoot first and ask questions later. There were some tribes who made the decision that fighting the United States Army was of no value, and tried to make peace with the government, but they were destined to suffer the same fate as the tribes that fought. One of those tribes was the Nez Perce, a tribe that had helped Lewis and Clark in the Corps of Discovery. Their leader, Chief Joseph, made the decision in 1877 that his tribe would, quote, fight no more forever, end quote. They had been involved in a series of small skirmishes and had tried to outrun the United States Army sent to rein them in and get to Canada. When they were unable to do so, they were forced to move to Indian Territory, along with those from the east who had marched along the Trail of Tears so many years before. Some Amerindian tribes were allowed to stay close to their ancestral homes, but moved to reservations. The Dawes Act, passed in 1887 and named for the Massachusetts Senator Henry Dawes, who wrote it, gave individual Amerindian families 160 acres on reservation land for them to farm and live on. This was the same amount of land given to the homesteaders who had moved west in the 1860s, and was seen as a way to help the Amerindian tribes assimilate or become part of traditional white American society. The problem for the Amerindians was that many of them were not used to this lifestyle. Many of them had been nomads and struggled to adjust to this change. The last of the major battles over land ownership on the Great Plains and the West was fought in 1890 at Wounded Knee in South Dakota. Feeling that they had very little hope for the future, many of the Sioux in the region turned to religion as a way to find peace. One of the rituals that they performed to help them with that was called the ghost dance. While the dance was meant only as a means of purification, United States government officials believed it was a prelude to the Sioux going on the warpath, and immediately called for U.S. Army assistance. Answering the call was the newly formed 7th Cavalry, the descendants of Custer's last stand at Little Bighorn, and they had very little mercy for the Sioux. During the effort to disarm one of the Sioux, one of their rifles was allegedly fired. This led to a larger battle in which it has been estimated by historian D. Brown in his book Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee that 300 of the 350 members of the Sioux tribe at Wounded Knee were killed or wounded. While this may differ from actual reports, the facts remain that the Amerindians decided that fighting the United States Army was no longer in their best interest and moved to reservations.